Imagine being born into a dynasty so powerful that its name alone feels heavier than history itself. The Kennedy legacy is woven with triumph, tragedy, glamour, and political fire, a tapestry that shaped an entire era of American identity. But while the world memorized the images of President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, very few paused to ask what happened to the generation that came next. Beyond the bright lights, far from the weight of cameras, 3 grandchildren grew up carrying a last name that still echoes across time. Their stories are not the stories people expected. Some stepped away from the shadow of power, carving identities untouched by politics, while another moved steadily toward a destiny the public had long predicted but never fully believed would arrive. Behind closed doors and far from the myth of Camelot, their lives unfolded in ways both surprising and deeply human. And the truth of where they stand today reveals a new chapter in the Kennedy legacy, one written quietly yet decisively by Rose, Tatiana, and Jack. The story of John F. Kennedy's 3 grandchildren is unlike anything the public imagined. Born decades after the turbulent era that defined their grandfather, they inherited a legacy shaped by sacrifice, national pride, and an unending scrutiny that none of them asked for. Rose, Tatiana, and Jack did not grow up in the marble halls of Washington, nor were they molded to become replicas of the icons who came before them. Instead, they were raised under the guidance of Caroline Kennedy, JFK's only surviving child, who understood better than anyone the cost of living in the public eye. Each grandchild was encouraged to pursue a life untouched by the expectations of politics, even as the Kennedy name followed them everywhere. This video explores their journeys from childhood to adulthood, reveals how they chose to define themselves, and uncovers the ways they have shaped, challenged, or continued the legacy that once transformed a nation. Their paths diverge, their ambitions differ, and yet together they represent the future of a family that remains etched in American memory. The Kennedy family has long stood as one of America's most recognizable dynasties, a symbol of political ambition, public service, and an almost cinematic blend of glamour and tragedy. President John F. Kennedy became an emblem of youthful leadership, while Jacqueline Kennedy transformed into an enduring cultural icon. Yet the brilliance of that era came with a cost. The relentless media attention, the national expectations, and the personal losses that haunted the family left deep marks that would echo far beyond the 1960s. Caroline Kennedy, the sole surviving child of JFK and Jackie, understood the fragility of fame better than anyone. She witnessed both the power and the heartbreak that came from living in a world where every decision was public and every moment could be overshadowed by the family legacy. When she became a mother, she made a conscious decision to raise her children away from the spotlight that had defined her early life. Rose, Tatiana, and Jack did not grow up on a political stage, but inside a home built on privacy, restraint, and the belief that a family's identity should be grounded in individual strength rather than inherited mythology. Their upbringing created a rare divide between the legacy the world projected onto them and the quiet, intentional childhood they actually lived. It is within this contrast, between a historic name and a deliberately ordinary environment, that the story of JFK's grandchildren truly begins. From this foundation of legacy and restraint, the lives of JFK's 3 grandchildren began to unfold in strikingly different directions. Though they shared the same last name and the same lineage, their personalities, passions, and ambitions carried them onto paths that could not be more distinct. This is where their stories diverge, moving from the collective weight of the Kennedy heritage into the intimate narrative of each individual. One embraced creativity and the arts, another devoted herself to research and environmental advocacy, and the last moved steadily toward a destiny that many had quietly whispered about for years. To understand the new generation of the Kennedy family, we must step into the life of each grandchild, beginning with the eldest, Rose Kennedy Schlossberg. Number 3. Rose Kennedy Schlossberg, born on June 25, 1988, entered the world as the first grandchild of President John F. Kennedy. Her name alone carried layers of history, honoring her great-grandmother, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, while quietly signaling the continuation of a family line shaped by national memory. From an early age, Rose was noted for her striking resemblance to Jacqueline Kennedy, a resemblance that drew public fascination even though she herself never sought the attention. But behind the surface comparisons, Rose quickly revealed a temperament and set of ambitions entirely her own, ones that would lead her away from politics and into a creative realm far removed from the corridors of power. Rose grew up in New York City, far from the political spotlight that had once followed her grandparents relentlessly. Her upbringing was intentionally crafted to feel normal, even ordinary, despite the weight of her lineage. She attended the Brearley School, where she developed a reputation as a thoughtful, curious student with a deep interest in reading and the arts. At home, her mother emphasized self-direction and privacy, teaching her children that their value lay not in the public's expectations, but in their own independent minds. Rose absorbed this lesson early. While the Kennedy name hovered in the background, she moved through her childhood with a quiet determination to be defined by her character, not her ancestry. By the time she reached adolescence, that resolve had crystallized into a growing fascination with storytelling, media, and the power of visual expression. Her academic path led her to Harvard University, where she majored in English and continued shaping her artistic identity. But it was her time at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts that marked a transformative leap. Immersed in a world of filmmaking, design, and experimental media, Rose found the creative freedom she had never fully experienced before. Her graduate thesis, a comedic web series that blended satire with survival themes, demonstrated both her talent and her willingness to challenge expectations. Instead of pursuing political influence, she harnessed art as a way to examine human behavior, social issues, and the absurdity of modern culture. Her later work as a producer and filmmaker reflected this same commitment, exploring topics ranging from criminal justice to fashion in ways that were bold, unconventional, and unmistakably her own. In her private life, Rose chose a path of intentional quiet. She moved to California, settling in a small community that offered distance from the world that once scrutinized every gesture of her family. Her marriage, celebrated in a private ceremony among close relatives, marked another step toward building a life grounded in authenticity rather than notoriety. Those who know her describe a person who values solitude, creativity, and a tightly held circle of trust. Despite her family's iconic past, she has carefully shaped a present that belongs entirely to her. Today, Rose stands as a figure who has preserved the spirit of independence that defined her upbringing. She has built a career rooted in artistic expression, contributed to socially conscious projects, and embraced a personal life that remains shielded from the public gaze. In doing so, she honors the legacy she was born into, not by replicating it, but by demonstrating that strength can come from stepping away from the spotlight. Her story is one of quiet reinvention, a reminder that even within a legendary family, identity must ultimately be self-created. Number 2. Tatiana Celia Kennedy Schlossberg, born on May 5, 1990. Entered the world as the second grandchild of John F. Kennedy and the middle child of Caroline Kennedy. While Rose carried the spark of artistic curiosity, Tatiana embodied a quieter, more introspective energy from an early age. She was thoughtful, analytical, and intensely observant. The kind of child who absorbed the details of the world around her with a seriousness beyond her years. Unlike the public's fascination with her older sister's resemblance to Jackie Kennedy, Tatiana drew far less outside attention, a difference that allowed her to grow with a sense of calm and academic focus. Her personality made it clear that she would not follow a path driven by public expectation, but rather one shaped by knowledge, research, and a persistent desire to understand the deeper mechanics of society. Tatiana's childhood in New York City mirrored her siblings' upbringing in its intentional simplicity. She attended the Brearley School and later the Trinity School, where her disciplined nature and intellectual curiosity became defining traits. She gravitated naturally toward history, writing, and environmental issues, displaying a commitment to learning that was steady and sincere rather than performative. The Kennedy legacy was part of her identity, but never its center. Under the guidance of her mother, she learned to treat her family's prominence as a piece of the past rather than a direction for her future. And that distinction empowered her to embrace academics without the burden of expectation. By the time she left for Yale University, she already understood that her contribution to the world would come not from public office, but from the careful and deliberate use of information. At Yale, Tatiana majored in history and fully immersed herself in journalism. She wrote extensively, eventually becoming editor-in-chief of the Yale Herald, a role that highlighted both her leadership and her precision as a writer. After graduating in 2012, she continued her studies at Oxford University, earning a master's degree in American history. These academic achievements reflected more than intelligence. They revealed a commitment to grounding her work in verified fact, thorough research, and a deep respect for the truth, a set of values that would shape the entirety of her career. When she joined the New York Times as a reporter covering climate and environmental issues, she approached the beat with urgency and clarity, writing about complex subjects with an accessible voice that resonated with readers outside the scientific community. Her work extended beyond journalism when she authored a book examining the hidden environmental consequences of everyday habits. It was a project that distilled her passions, making scientific knowledge understandable, encouraging responsible choices, and adding nuance to discussions about climate change. Critics praised her ability to translate data into meaningful narratives, noting the balance she struck between seriousness and wit. Her writing illustrated a core element of her identity. She believed that the most powerful change often comes not from political authority, but from informed citizens and well-told truths. In her personal life, Tatiana has maintained the same understated presence she carries in her work. She married George Moran, a physician she met during her years at Yale, in a private ceremony at Martha's Vineyard. Their life together has remained centered on family and quiet stability, a contrast to the public world her relatives once inhabited. When her son was born, the family welcomed a new generation into the Kennedy lineage. Yet Tatiana continued to nurture a lifestyle rooted in privacy and intellectual engagement rather than public attention. Those who know her describe her as deliberate, grounded, and deeply committed to the causes she believes in. Today, Tatiana stands as one of the most intellectually driven voices of her generation within the Kennedy family. Her contributions to environmental journalism, her academic work, and her clear-eyed approach to global issues demonstrate a legacy expressed not through speeches or public office, but through thoughtful action and informed insight. She represents a new kind of public service, one that wields knowledge as its most powerful tool. Her path reinforces the idea that influence does not always come from the spotlight. Sometimes it emerges from the patient, persistent work done far from it. Number 1. John Jack BOUVIER. Kennedy Schlossberg, born on January 19, 1993, arrived as the youngest of the 3 siblings and the only grandson of President John F. Kennedy. From the moment his name was announced, the public could not help but draw parallels. Carrying the combined legacy of his grandfather, John F. Kennedy, and his great-grandfather, John "Blackjack" BOUVIER, he was born into expectations that no child could fully comprehend. Yet Jack's early years revealed a personality defined not by the weight of history, but by humor, curiosity, and an unusual sense of ease. Even as observers speculated about whether he might one day enter politics, Jack himself grew up intent on simply being a young man navigating school, friendships, and the challenge of carving out a personal identity within one of America's most scrutinized families. His childhood in New York City paralleled the grounded, intentionally private upbringing designed by Caroline Kennedy for all her children. He attended the collegiate school, where he quickly became known not for his lineage, but for his quick wit, friendliness, and talent for making others laugh. Teachers and classmates alike described him as someone who could diffuse tension with a joke and bring warmth into any room. Beneath that humor, however, was a sharp mind. Jack excelled academically, ultimately graduating as valedictorian of his class. While the Kennedy history lingered in the background, he embraced a normal boyhood filled with clubs, school activities, and youthful experimentation. During those years, political expectations remained little more than whispers that trailed behind him, never dictating his day-to-day life. Jack's path toward adulthood took him through a series of experiences that broadened his worldview far beyond what many might have predicted for a presidential grandson. He enrolled at Yale University, majoring in history with a particular interest in Japan, a country he spent significant time in while accompanying his mother during her diplomatic assignment in Tokyo. At Yale, he continued writing, contributing to campus publications and eventually becoming editor-in-chief of the Yale Herald, just as his sister Tatiana had done. After graduating, Jack moved to Japan for a brief but formative period, working first at the tech company Rakuten and later at the beverage corporation Suntory. These roles demonstrated not only his willingness to step outside the American political sphere, but also his desire to experience life in global contexts, learning and adapting far from the familiar shadow of Washington. Eventually, Jack returned to the United States to take on one of the most demanding academic challenges of his life: a joint degree program at Harvard, pursuing both a law degree and an MBA. The workload was heavy, the expectations even heavier. Yet he completed both programs with distinction. Alongside his studies, he contributed articles to major publications such as Time, The Washington Post, and Politico, offering thoughtful perspectives on public issues. He also briefly worked at the U.S. State Department, giving him a first-hand look at governmental operations. Through these experiences, one theme became increasingly clear. Unlike his sisters, Jack carried an innate desire to engage with the public sphere, not because he was a Kennedy, but because public service spoke to something intrinsic within him. In his personal life, Jack has maintained a humorous, approachable demeanor that contrasts with the formality often associated with political families. He has occasionally stepped into the public eye, participating in family events at the Kennedy Library, and even making a light-hearted television cameo that showcased his playful personality. Yet beneath the humor lies a seriousness of purpose. Over the last several years, speculation surrounding his political future intensified, fueled by his speeches, his advocacy for youth engagement, and his growing comfort with public visibility. Eventually, the question that had followed him since childhood found its answer. He stepped into the political arena and announced his candidacy for Congress. It was a moment that symbolized not a surrender to family destiny, but a deliberate choice rooted in education, experience, and personal conviction. Today, Jack stands at the threshold of becoming the first of JFK's grandchildren to seek elected office. His journey reflects a balance between honoring a family legacy and forging his own interpretation of public service. His decision to pursue politics carries both symbolic weight and personal authenticity, marking the beginning of a chapter that the world has quietly anticipated for decades. Whether he succeeds will depend not on his last name, but on his ability to translate his experiences, intelligence, and sense of humor into meaningful leadership. In him, the Kennedy story finds its next possible successor, not through imitation, but through evolution. Among the three grandchildren of President John F. Kennedy, it is Jack who inevitably stands at the center of public attention. His sisters forged meaningful lives in journalism, environmental advocacy, and the arts. But Jack's trajectory carries an unmistakable echo of the family's political lineage. For decades, observers wondered whether any member of the newest generation would dare to enter the arena that once defined their grandfather's legacy. That question intensified as Jack matured, shaped by international experiences, rigorous academic training, and a growing comfort with public discourse. Each step he took hinted at an evolving sense of responsibility, one rooted not in obligation but in a genuine desire to engage with the challenges facing his generation. The shift from private citizen to public figure did not happen abruptly. It revealed itself gradually through written commentary, public speeches, and his contributions to national discussions on political engagement. His ability to combine historical understanding with humor made him particularly striking among a generation often disillusioned with traditional politics. He demonstrated a talent for speaking directly to young voters, not with the polished rhetoric of a seasoned politician, but with a candid tone that felt fresh and grounded. Yet beneath the charisma lay a more serious transformation. The same young man who once explored life abroad and experimented with various career paths began to articulate a clearer vision of public service and civic duty. The moment Jack announced his candidacy for Congress marked the culmination of years of speculation. It was not merely a political decision, but a symbolic turning point for the Kennedy family. For the first time in more than half a century, a direct descendant of JFK stepped forward to re-enter the world of elected leadership. The significance of this moment extended beyond Jack himself. It represented the renewal of a legacy interrupted by tragedy and reshaped by the quiet determination of the generation in between. Jack's entry into politics revived a narrative the nation had watched unfold for decades. Yet it also diverged from the past in important ways. He approached public service not with nostalgia for Camelot, but with a modern perspective shaped by global experience, academic rigor, and a deeply personal sense of purpose. As Jack ventures into the political landscape, he carries not only his family's history but also his own ambitions, shaped independently of the myth that surrounds his name. Whether he succeeds will depend on the choices he makes in the coming years and on his ability to connect authentically with constituents who judge him not by legacy, but by action. His rise signals the possibility of a new chapter for the Kennedy name, one not defined by comparisons to the past, but by the contributions of a new generation. In Jack, the family's enduring connection to public service finds a fresh voice, steady and deliberate, stepping into a future that belongs unmistakably to him. The story of John F. Kennedy's 3 grandchildren is not a tale shaped by destiny, but by choice. Rose, Tatiana, and Jack each inherited a name that once carried the weight of a nation's hopes, yet none of them allowed that weight to dictate the limits of their lives. Instead, they approached their inheritance with a quiet determination to build identities grounded not in the expectations of others, but in their own convictions. Rose stepped into the world of creativity, transforming art into a tool for understanding culture and emotion. Tatiana pursued truth through journalism and environmental research, using knowledge as her instrument of public service. And Jack, after years of deliberate exploration, chose to stand where many believed a Kennedy might eventually return, offering his voice to the political landscape once shaped by his grandfather. Their journeys reveal a generation that did not grow up in the glare of cameras or the pressure of constant scrutiny, but within the protective boundaries drawn by a mother who understood the cost of fame. That decision allowed them to rise as individuals, not replicas, preserving the family's legacy while reshaping it in ways that reflect the complexities of the modern world. Through their choices, they demonstrated that legacy is not a predetermined path, but a foundation from which new possibilities emerge. In the end, the Kennedy story continues, not through the weight of nostalgia, but through the authenticity of 3 lives lived with intention. They stand as reminders that history is carried forward not by those who imitate the past, but by those who reinterpret it with clarity, purpose, and compassion. And as their futures unfold, the Kennedy name enters a new era, defined not by the shadows behind them, but by the chapters they choose to write next.